The Money Show.
Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
Warren Ingram, good evening to you, and always good to hear from you on The Money Show. Tonight, you want to talk specifically about how to make retirement savings last longer, and I suppose in a way that's the entire point, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And I think it's one of those things when people are retired and watching their cost of living going straight through the roof, this is a tough question for them because they can't go back to work. They have retired or been retired for a reason. And so they find themselves trying to make their rands and cents stretch as far as they possibly can, and do it in a way that they don't entirely compromise their quality of life. And I think often it's enormously stressful. I don't think we really realize it, how much stress retired people have with this whole situation until we get there ourselves. So I thought we should maybe just give people a few pointers as to what they can do to make the money last longer, both from an expense point of view, but also from an investment point of view.
One of the things that you suggest is that you must withdraw wisely, in other words, very carefully.
Yeah, and I think people, they start their retirement careers and they possibly have a lot more time on their hands, and so the temptation to do one of two things happens. Either they freak out, so they spend absolutely nothing and they live in their houses too scared to do anything because they're so worried about running out. And lots of people get to retirement with enough money, but the fear levels are so high that they don't withdraw what they can in a sensible way. And so they really live a very, very compromised life. And it's a very sad thing to see. The other grouping are people that then spend a little bit too much, and they're a bit too free and easy with their money, not remembering that they could easily live. If you retire at 65, it's very possible to live another 30 years. Kind of the actuaries are telling us that women will make it to age 102 if they're in their 50s now, and so understanding the impact of longevity is important. So I think two things. One, if you think you've got enough and you've done your sums and you believe you have enough money, then don't underspend so much in the early parts of retirement that you live this terrible life. You've worked incredibly hard to get to this point, and don't make a terrible mistake of living like a hermit and leaving all the money to your kids. That's not why you worked. You want to set them up in life and then look after yourself. And maybe the one thing to look at is, I talk about it a bit, is this 4% rule, which is saying that if you've got your annual expenses, let's say, are 100,000 a year. I don't know anybody that spends only 100,000, but let's say it's 100,000 a year. What you can do is multiply your expenses by 25, and that will tell you how much investment capital you need to be able to retire comfortably. So if you've got more than 25 times your annual expenses, you are fine. You can spend the money and you can be okay. Equally, if you are one of those people that's completely overspending and you should be spending 100,000 and you're actually spending 150, and you do your 25 times calculation and you realize you don't have enough money, then you need to make an adjustment very quickly to the way you spend and cut your cloth accordingly.
Where does a 4% come from? I mean, is that just the number that this works out at?
So I'll give you a very simple calculation because it's the only ones that I can understand are the simple ones. And so let's say you have all your money invested in the most generic, biggest balanced unit trust in South Africa. Over a long period of time, a balanced unit trust will give you somewhere around 10% growth a year. And so if you draw 4% of that growth every year, that means you're leaving behind 6% a year. And that 6% a year pretty much matches our cost of living increases in South Africa. And I know that we might say that, inflation, over long periods of time, the Reserve Bank will tell us it's around about 4.5%. And I'm sure that's true. But cost of living for people who are a little bit older will be higher because their medical aid costs are going to accelerate faster than cost of food, etc. So I think allowing 6% growth to remain in your investment and only draw 4% a year means that every year over long periods of time, your amount that you can draw should keep pace with inflation. So your cost of living should be okay, and your quality of life should be okay, and your capital should sustain at least sort of 20 to 30 years, and very possibly much longer than that. So that's where it comes from. I think it's a very common sense approach to investing. Was pioneered by the Americans who came up with this 4% rule, but it's entirely actually perfect for us in South Africa.
It does make a lot of sense. Also, investing for growth. And I mean, I think a lot of us, if you get to retirement age, you want to be quite conservative in how you invest.
There was a few of the big banks in South Africa that used to force their staff members to convert their retirement funds. They didn't even have a choice. That was just done for them. In the 2 years before retirement, they would start to take a big chunk of the retirement money, their pension or provident funds, and put them into cash portfolios. And by the time the person actually retired, their entire retirement fund was sitting in cash. And the logic was that people couldn't afford to lose money in the last year or two before retirement. So let's put their money in cash, and at least at retirement, they will have their lump sum assured. Now, that's all good and well if your life expectancy is 5 or maybe 10 years at most after retirement. But life expectancy is not that. Life expectancy is probably 30, 40 years for a lot of people after retirement. And if you've got a time horizon of 30 or 40 years, you absolutely cannot be too cautious with your money. You need to have a very large exposure of your retirement assets, invested in the stock markets, both in South Africa and overseas. And if we look at what the law allows, there is a set of regulations called Regulation 28 that determines how much of our retirement money can be invested in different assets, including the stock market. And the law says you can go up to 75% in shares. And I think that's a very sensible number. So be properly diversified. Don't put all your money into a few shares, must still be very diversified, but have a large proportion in the stock markets, a smaller proportion in cash and bonds, and watch your capital grow over long periods of time.
In other words, you got to keep playing the game, I suppose, really is what you're saying. And then obviously, you've got to reduce expenses as well.
I think it's for the times when cost of living is accelerating faster than we all thought. And it's not to conflict with the first point that I made, where you should spend sensibly, and sometimes for some people that will mean spending a bit more. But for most of us, when the stock markets go down a lot or cost of living accelerates faster than what we were anticipating, then that's the time to look at your expenses and say, what can I adjust in a sensible way? Small amounts. On things that are not critical to lifestyle, and for example, don't cut the maintenance to your house if you own your house. That doesn't make sense. And don't cut your medical aid and your car insurance. But what are the things that you can do? For example, if you were eating out once a week, maybe go to every second week for a little while. So make the small little changes where you can reduce your expenses and still live a good quality of life, but allow your money to last that much longer. Then when cost of living comes down again, and believe it or not, that does happen from time to time, or investment markets recover and your capital grows again, you can always go back to the lifestyle that you were living before whatever the event was that happened to cause you to have to cut your costs.
And I suppose one of the things is that cutting costs for a year has a big impact in terms of the money that you save, especially if you invest in that. I mean, if you invest that, what I'm trying to say is that it can change your trajectory if you do it right.
Agreed. So you find that in a down year. So if we look at what happened in the financial crisis, or maybe 2022 when interest rates started going through the roof, people who were able to adjust the amount that they drew from their retirement money, and by adjust I mean reduce the amount that they drew, it had a huge impact because your investment portfolios might have been down 10 or 15%, and so drawing the normal rate, let's say you were drawing 4% from a portfolio that was now down 15%, it meant that your portfolio could be down as much as 19% over that year, and that's a big chunk to let slide on you, and so drawing a little bit less has a huge impact on allowing the capital to stay invested. And when the recovery happens, you almost get a double whammy. And I think that's the point about this is, when the markets are booming and times are good, then, you can relax a bit and spend a bit more. But when times are tough and inflation is high and your portfolio is down, being able to cut your expenses a bit, it's almost as if you're generating 2 rand for every 1 rand that you're managing to reduce in expenses.
And then the idea of delaying your retirement. I know some people who can't wait to stop working. I know some people who actually I get quite irritated, and the older I get, the more I understand them when they're told they have to stop working at 60 or 65. The idea of a sort of retirement age. Is it a good idea to keep working if you can?
Absolutely. I think for so many reasons, there are undoubted health benefits to working longer. The more we can keep our brains active, engaged, and stimulated with various inputs. From talking to different colleagues every day, especially of different age groups, to having to learn new skills all the time. And I know as we get older, learning, whether it's now learning how to use Teams or Zoom or whatever it is, whatever's next, now learning to use chat, all of those things, they might be a little bit frightening as we get older. But the point is learning those new things keeps the brain very active and very engaged and has a big mental health impact. And often things like depression, are prevented by allowing you to keep your brain going and get stimulation from very different kinds of people in your life. Whereas if you are retired, your social circle definitely shrinks, and so your mental stimulation from others is somewhat limited. And then I think understanding the financial impact of delaying retirement. If you are able to keep working to age 70, as an example, that's 5 years of drawings that you haven't taken out of your money, and that means that capital gets to compound on itself. And that's a really powerful thing. And equally, it allows you, for example, if you scale back your work somewhat at age 65 to 70, you could spend some of the extra money you're generating from working on better holidays or more travel, or bringing the grandkids out from overseas if that's where they live. Whatever it is, you have a lot more choices there, and you're not scraping the pennies. So I think that it does make sense to delay retirement. I can't really understand why we have this sort of compulsory retirement age now, when some of the best sort of brains and skill sets we have rely on enormous amounts of experience, and then we force them out of the work environment at age 63 or 65, when people are going to live to age 90 or 95. Doesn't make sense to me that we still force this retirement age. I think we should allow that to go longer, and I think it will have an impact on unemployment, where younger people coming into the workplace get mentored by older people who have the time and the patience to help them.
It's 11 minutes to 8. Warren Intlantla is on the line from Northcliffe. Intlantla's got a question around banks. Intlantla, good evening. You're on the line to Warren Ingram. Go for it.
Hi, thanks, David. Hi, Warren. My question is regarding because I've been fishing around, I've been looking around with the interest rate that the banks can, the maximum that they can give you. I think I've seen some few banks that usually offer an annual interest rate of 8.75%. So I wanted to know regarding I know with the stock markets and all that type of thing. So is it not also maybe wise to also put some of the money with the banks that can give you that return annually, about 8%?
Warren, what do you think? I mean, 8%, it's above inflation and I presume risk-free.
Yes,
it's a great question, Cutler. I think to understand that we should all have some cash in our investment portfolios. Whether you put it in a bank or in a money market account, I don't really mind. Hunting for the best interest rate does make sense, but I think we need to be careful not to have too much cash. So typically, if you work in a very predictable, salaried environment, maybe somewhere around 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses in an emergency fund makes sense. And then maybe another 6 months, that you keep in a cash account for some kind of a return. But let's just use that 8% example. If you're earning a salary and you're paying income tax and you're earning interest, just understand that SARS is taking a portion of that interest that you're earning for tax, because it becomes part of your income tax. So you're not going to take home, after tax, you're not going to take home 8-point-something%. You're probably only going to take home 5 or 6% at most. And then maybe you're getting a bit closer to the inflation rate. And my experience is that inflation and interest rates tend to match each other over long periods of time, especially when you take into account tax. So by all means, I think some cash is a good idea, but don't be fooled by the 8.2% or 8.5%, because that's not what you're actually going to bank at the end of the year.
Intlantla, thanks so much for the question.
Thanks, I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Intlantla on the line from Northcliffe. We have another question for Warren. It comes from Mike, and he's asking about interest rates, and his question is most people seem confident that interest rates will start coming down. I understand this will make debt cheaper. What does it mean for my investments, Mike? We'll have an answer for you in just a moment.
The Money Show. Personal Finance with Warren Ingram.
And as we come back, Warren, of course, that question from Mike was, people are expecting interest rates to come down. It'll make debt cheaper. What does it mean for my investments? It came from Mike. Warren, what does it mean for investments? I mean, it's not that great news, is it?
I think it's actually happy days, Stephen. Just to understand, when interest rates come down, that means that companies that have debt, they'll have a little bit more money on the income statement, so they get a bit more to spend and to reinvest in themselves and to grow their profits, which is good for shareholders. It means that generally the price of bonds will start to rise because the price of a bond goes up when interest rates come down, and the same with property companies, for example. Their prices tend to rise as interest rates come down. So it's generally very good news. What usually happens is that investors start to anticipate that these interest rates are going to come down. So they tend to push markets up in advance of the interest rate cut. And then usually what happens is they get a little bit disappointed when the first interest rate cut happens because they'll be expecting it to be, let's say, come down by 0.5%. And then, the reserve banks are always a bit cautious and they only cut by 0.25. And then everyone gets a bit depressed for a while until the next interest rate cut. And then it's happy days again. So I think for people that have growth investments, and for me, growth investments means the stock market, the property market, or the bond market, it's really good news when interest rates come down in a sustained way. Equally, those that are sitting on cash or money markets, they're listening to the question from Nhlanhla, they're going to be a little bit bleak now because the next time that they want to lock in an interest rate at a fixed deposit or something like that, they're going to earn a little bit less. So those that have cash get a bit disappointed with interest rates coming down. Those that have debt are thrilled, and those that have growth investments tend to really enjoy the declining interest rate environment.
Okay, and that's very clear. And then you've also got to protect yourself against longevity risk. I mean, you don't want to, it's great if you live long, but you don't want to live long without money. Exactly right.
And I think it's one of those things that, we were just talking about, retiring at 65 and then having to not having to, but staying alive for another 30 or 35 years or 40 years. It's a heck of a long time to live off your money. And a lot of people, when they do their financial planning, would have forecast that, that their life expectancy would be 20 or 25 years. And then, it's surprising and not always in a good way when you get to, age 85 and you're incredibly healthy and able to do a lot, but your money's running out fast. And so you have to think about longevity as a very real prospect. So many times when I speak to people at age 65, they'll tell me, my parents died at 80 or my parents died at 75. There's no way I'm going to make it. And when you do speak to them 20 years later, they're incredibly good health and very grumpy with life because they didn't plan correctly. So I think you must plan for a long life unless you've got very serious medical conditions where your life expectancy is going to be compromised. Don't just make an assumption. It's much better to die with some money in the bank than get to the end of your money and still have a lot of life left. And that's a terrifying position to be in. So I think plan for longevity and look at things like guaranteeing your income with guaranteed annuities if you've got longevity in your life. Or one of the things we spoke about a bit earlier was, invest in proper growth assets so that you're well compensated for growing your capital over a long period of time to take care of this longevity risk.
And guaranteed annuities, I mean, how do they work compared to others? I mean, obviously that gives you and what you're going to get for a long time.
Exactly. And I think it's one of those things that, were incredibly popular 40, 50 years ago, where people would retire and they would effectively be given a guaranteed pension. So they would start their first year of retirement. They would know that they're going to get 10,000 Rand a month, as an example, and it would go up with the cost of living. It would go up with CPI every year. And for as long as they're alive, they get that income stream. And over time that sort of guaranteed annuities base started to change, and people moved to living annuities more. But something like the Government Employees Pension Fund, they'll have the option of a guaranteed annuity, and you can buy them for yourself if you don't work for a big employer. And I think it's something to seriously consider if you've got longevity in your family and you're in good health. The prospect of living for 30 or 40 years with limited means is really scary.
Indeed. Yeah, it's very interesting to see. All right, Warren Ingram, thank you very much indeed. Registered financial planner on The Money Show tonight.